And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panel.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to peer around the podium at those of you over there. Hello. My name is Cameron Anktel. I'm with the Foster Green Task Force, and I'm here this morning with Wayne Watson and Brian Busby. Wayne is the VP of Operations, North American Operations for Compass Data Centers, and you are all over the U.S. all the time. He travels about 50% of the year. And Brian Busby, who is the HVO guru, I guess you could say, at Foster Mission Critical. He knows the ins and outs of this HVO renewable diesel, and we're lucky enough to have him here today to introduce or maybe have a healthy discussion with all of you about what HVO is doing in the facilities management sector. So with almost 10 years of progression from fossil to HVO renewable diesel under Europe's belt, stateside data on HVO has been incredibly hard to come by. Now that the US refineries are producing HVO, and there are about 4 refineries here in the US right now that are producing it actively, with more coming on board each day, we can explore the ins and outs of the US data center transition to the sustainable energy option with key US industry stakeholder. So we're lucky enough to have Compass here today. I have a passion for sustainability and simplifying sustainability because there are so many ins and outs to it, and ESG has become sort of a blessing and a curse in our industry. I think some of you probably feel that. So we're all here today to work together to try and educate and expand everybody's knowledge about this source. So Wayne, he has over 15 years of experience in operating nuclear and data center critical environments. He specializes in design and construction support, commissioning, and operations of small, large, and hyperscale data center environments. Wayne gets into the nitty-gritty. He's an expert in reviewing complex drawings and procedures, planning commissioning activities, and operating data centers with a proven track record in uptime. Wayne's been part of the commissioning team for Compass's HVO migration since day one. And Brian, he has extensive experience in the energy and fuel industry. He spent 5 years in the standby power industry. He's an expert in fueling operations and critical facilities in North America. Working hands-on in the market leading hyperscalers, co-location providers, and enterprises, his experience offers insight into the present and future needs of business continuity through backup power generation. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I would like to get a show of hands from the audience. Have any of you actually worked with HVO yet, or are you in the beginning stages of working with HVO? Anyone? Okay, wow. This is a cool opportunity then. I'm excited. I didn't know anything about the product last year at this time, I'll be completely honest with you, and had the opportunity to get involved and was skeptical of the quality and the sustainability of it. And I've really become a fan of it. So I'm excited to hear what they have to say today. So starting from the top, Brian, can you tell us about HVO and its origin?
Yeah, so I think Cameron mentioned a minute ago, currently it's been being used in Europe for about 10 years now. Here in the States for about 5, but it's mainly been on the West Coast, California, Washington State, and Oregon. Outside of that, the availability has only been by rail. You've had to bring it in by rail car. But as far as kind of the origin of the makeup of it, it is a completely renewable fuel made from vegetable waste and animal fats. It's hydro-treated and it's pressurized with hydrogen, so the makeup is very, very similar to diesel fuel.
And so what was the catalyst behind HVO becoming part of the mission critical offering at Foster?
Yeah, so we saw a need with a customer who wanted to use this and looking for different ways to be sustainable. So we saw a need for it and wanted to fill that need for a customer. But also we wanted to look at ways to provide fuel that is more green and more sustainable than petroleum diesel. And I think it's been a good product that we've been able to offer. So.
So one of the interesting things that I've seen is when you have restaurants and eateries that are using cooking oil and cooking fats, they used to have to pay to have those that used oil taken away. And since this has become a thing and biofuels have become a thing, they're now being paid to have it removed, and it's actually becoming a premium. So it's nice to see the circularity of that, and that then we're able to use it for fuel. So with the, I guess my first observation, and I put together some slides here, over 90% of the ingredients are recycled. And so because these ingredients have already had their actual life by definition, the result is a net zero product. So when this goes into when this fuels, you're having a net zero outcome. So for those of you that have companies that are looking to reduce your carbon footprint, this sustainable fuel, it's a net zero. So I'm going to talk more with them about it. So what goes into actually getting the generators and the things that the cars, vehicles, whatever it is that are being powered, what does it take to get them ready to be fueled with this diesel?
Nothing. It's a one-for-one swap for petroleum-based diesel. So if you're running a generator now or a piece of equipment on regular petroleum diesel and you want to swap over to that, it is a one-for-one swap. And then if for some reason you need to go back for emergency purposes, you don't have that on hand or whatever, diesel is all that's available, you can go back and forth. There is no difference in what you need to do to the piece of equipment.
So they can be even in the same tank at the same time?
Correct. Okay. And in some instances there are. We've got some places where there is a mixture of diesel and renewable diesel in the same tank, and have we've seen no issues as far as performance or in testing. So.
Okay, cool. One of the other things that I'm going to pull up this slide here. This is showing well-to-tank energy use of different fuels. And as you'll see, there are multiple HVO sources here listed. HVO is a non-fungible fuel, meaning like when you put gas in your car, if you're using an 87 octane or 93 octane or 94 octane with the higher end fuels, it's not the same thing. Well, with HVO, same thing. They're not apples to apples, and so the different companies have different sourcing methods. And so some are using palm oil, some are using more waste oil. It's not apples to apples. So as you can see here, what I found really interesting is that the well-to-tank energy use overall to produce diesel as a fossil fuel, which is what we've always been using, the actual energy use is really quite low. But because the HVO is renewable, the energy that is used to produce it does still have a net zero impact. So, and if you look at it, the HVO that comes from cooking oil is much more efficient in production than, say, palm oil or even the rapeseed oil. And FAME, some people are used to, I think they've heard of using FAME oils. So we're excited about this source because it is net zero, and your sustainability and your carbon numbers that you're putting out for your company annually are going to be substantially reduced if you're using a lot of diesel. Let me head over to that page and I'll just leave that up there for you. So being non-fungible, can you talk a little bit about the refineries here in the US and how the products stack up against each other, the differences of the types of fuel, not necessarily the brands?
So there's several refineries here in the US that produce this, and as you saw a minute ago, different products. Palm oil, the product that we are using is mainly rapeseed, which is canola, and some corn crush, and it also uses some animal fats, but very little, more of on the vegetable side of things. As far as the sustainability of that, Cameron hit on it earlier with the restaurants. They're getting paid to provide this oil. They're getting paid for it versus having to pay somebody to come get it. It's the same with farmers. Once they harvest the product, the crush that they had before. They were either putting it back in the ground, making silage, or whatever they were doing with this product. Now they're able to sell this to refineries, and it has become another market for them to be able to make an income for their farms. As far as palm oil goes, there's a couple companies that use palm oil, and they're trying to get away from that because as the fuel is sustainable, they're having to cut these trees down and harvest these trees to make that fuel. So it's not as sustainable as it might sound. But like I said, the products we are using is mainly canola, rapeseed, vegetable crush, and some animal fats.
And so with the actual delivery process, what goes into getting it, how are you working to make it more sustainable? Because the other thing that I've heard is, okay, great, you've got this sustainable net zero product, but we have to actually get it into the tanks. And so are we negating the process throughout? So how are we working with that?
Yeah, so now we kind of touched on it a little earlier, it's not available up the pipeline, so it's being shipped by rail, which rail is a pretty green way to ship things. You're shipping a lot of product at one time, and so we use rail to get it there. And then actually the trucks that we are using, we actually use this product in those trucks as we're delivering this fuel to kind of offset some of the carbon emissions as well in that. And also to show that this product is a good product. We're not afraid to put it in our own equipment and use it and run it. So
I've seen a lot of construction using it in Europe.
Yeah.
So I don't hear about that much here in the US, but
Right.
yeah. So Wayne, can you delve into your ordering as a data center and the high volume that you're going through and how you've implemented HVO into Compass's?
Sure. Yeah, we're not the first data center company to use HVO, definitely not the first in the world because, like you said, they've been using it in Europe for quite a bit. But we are the first company that's using it in a multi-regional initial fill strategy for our commissioning. We're turning up data halls and buildings and top-offs after that commissioning. So you have to order bulk loads of this because it is shipped by rail car, to make it as economical as possible. But we've partnered with Foster to come up with storage options locally in order to store what we don't use at the time so we can have some in reserve and then have that initial top off after commissioning as well. How many have we ordered? How many gallons have we ordered so far, Brian?
I think so far, last year it was a little over 500,000 gallons last year.
Yeah.
And then I think we've had already this year we've delivered, 250,000 gallons this year already. So
Yeah, that feels right because we're turning up, 100, 150 megawatts between last year and this year. So, that's a lot of 2 meg generator belly tanks to fill up, but we're doing it.
So I got a hold of those numbers beforehand, and there's a really cool website that you can plug in, and I had plugged in, I think it was right around the 500,000 gallon mark, and that equivalent in carbon reduction, just to kind of put it in perspective, is the equivalent of all of the homes in the state of New York having their lights turned off for 3 days. All of the residential homes in the state of New York. That is the carbon reduction that comes from the gallonage that they've already put through their tanks or have in the first year. Are you at a year yet?
We are at a year, yes.
Yeah. So it's interesting to put it in a different perspective because you hear, carbon reduction and how many metric tons and that sort of thing, but to actually think about all of the lights in homes in New York being off for 3 days is pretty monumental, I'd say. And that's one data center one data center company that's doing this. So
Yep.
that's cool. So in terms of safety and getting everything ready to go, did you have to go through permitting? How does that work?
Oh, sure. So as Brian mentioned, it's a direct drop-in replacement for diesel. So there's no filter changes. There's no using a different pump. There's nothing you have to do different to the generators we had up earlier, Cummins, Kohler, everyone that's already OEM spec'd it to work. So there's no issue in modifying the generators. What we did find out is that as government entities are sometimes, they're very particular about nomenclature and specificities of permitting. So, your generator permits say you're allowed to use ULSD in your generator, and that's how they calculate the emissions and the particulates in those emissions. So we actually did have to re-permit our generators, and it wasn't even a re-permit, it was an addendum to that permit saying that we could use diesel, HVO, or a mixture of the two in any percentages. So that was a relatively easy process, not very expensive, especially with a consultant that knows what they're doing. It did take about 2-3 months just to get it through all the red tape, but once they, and we're talking about Loudoun County, Virginia, Maricopa County, Arizona, and then Dallas, Texas. So in 3 different markets, we did those addendums, and all of the AHJs were very interested in what HVO was and how we were going to use it. When they did the particulate calculations, they did find it burned a little cleaner, which was nice. So not only do you get that carbon reduction during the manufacturing process, but it's a little less particulates into the air when it's ran as well. And that was what we found is that it's just so similar to diesel. We even wanted to take a video of the exhaust and see what it looked like, if it was any whiter or cleaner. But we turned them over, and it's a big puff of black smoke. As bad as that sounds to sustainability options, but to a facility operator, and I know how y'all feel about it as well, because we're always looking for that. Is this actual? Is this real? Because for me, it sounded too good to be true. I mean, you don't have to change anything. It's just a drop in, a mixture of the two. If you get in a bind and you're running for days on end, can you just put diesel in the tank with any amount of HVO in? And we've done all of that. I mean, we ran for almost 2 days in Dallas, Texas, trying to commissioning the data center there, and those generators performed quite well. In Arizona, we ran them at random mixture just because we filled them up with HVO and then needed to put diesel in them. And then there's the winterization that Brian can talk about a little bit, where you add the 10% diesel in, so you don't have any issues during the winter. But yeah, we found it to be the replacement for diesel that we thought it was and that we hoped it was.
So Brian, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because we had a bitter cold end of December in Northern Virginia. How did everything operate in that market, and what did you have to do? Did you have to additize or anything?
Yeah. So yeah, everything seemed to operate fine. Talking with the local facilities guys on site, they do their annual or quarterly runs, or excuse me, I guess we all do bi-weekly runs, or what do y'all do?
Monthly runs.
Monthly runs. Okay, so doing those monthly runs, talking to those guys, they were running fine even during that cold weather. But with this fuel, the coal filter plugging point is a little bit higher than petroleum diesel, so we do additize it, which we recommend with petroleum diesel as well. But we also put a 10% mixture of diesel in with this product. What that does is it allows that. It will lower the coal filter plugging point, but it allows that additive that we put in that fuel to mix a little better. It doesn't mix with the HVO or with that renewable diesel as well as it does petroleum diesel. So once you put that mixture together, it lets that additive mix a whole lot better and actually reduce that coal filter plugging point. And we found with the 10% diesel and the additive, you get to a very, very similar number within a few digits of what petroleum diesel is. So.
Gotcha.
What generation diesel engines are we talking about? Is it Tier 4, Tier 3, Tier 2?
These are all Tier 3. You guys have got.
We're Tier 3.
Yeah, Tier 3. These are all Tier 3 common rail injected generators. Yeah.
I see. And anything for direct injection or idea?
Yes. So there are some. We have not delivered to any direct injected, but there are some older Kohlers and stuff out there where they have. I do know of having delivered to, but we specifically have not. No, sir. So you're talking about what generation of generators are we talking about? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. So yeah, like I said, all the ones that we've been delivering to are Tier 3 gens. Yes, correct. Yes, sir.
I can tell you in my research that looking at different company websites, like looking at a Cummins site or looking at a Kohler site, they do list the generators that they've approved for use with it. And it's the majority of them, but you have to look at dating and that sort of thing. So that might be a good source for you to, from what I've found, to look at the individual manufacturer websites.
Yeah, the individual manufacturers' websites. She actually referenced Cummins, but most of the OEMs that were up earlier, Cummins, Kohler, John Deere, I guess Cat's up there as well. You can look at their websites, and most of those websites will give you a list of generators that they have approved for usage with this fuel.
Yeah, I mean, it's set in our tanks as fine as any. We've been doing quarterly testing for the last year and a half, and we've come back with, normal results every time so far, but you can speak to the more technical long-term aspect.
Yeah, so as far as longevity, the shelf life is looking to be the same as diesel. Cameron kind of alluded earlier, it's been in Europe for about 10 years now being used. Here in the States for long-term storage, it has not been used here I'm not saying you're the only, Compass is the first, but one of the very first as far as data centers using it for long-term storage. Before, it was really used in California for over-the-road transportation. So it was not sitting in tanks for a long time, but it has been used for standby power in Europe for years. Mm-hmm. So the data we're seeing there, that it's lasting as long or longer than diesel fuel. Here, what we have recommended is a little beefed up fuel quality program, which would be, we've recommended quarterly testing, and we've tested one facility they have for a year now quarterly, and all tests have come back passing and looking just like we would expect diesel to look over that year time frame. We just tested one of your other sites we've tested, I believe, twice, and the other we just did the first on it, and all of those tests have come back normal. So.
What's the cost comparison for production of it and the actual cost?
The cost comparison for production, I couldn't tell you what the cost for production. We don't produce it, so yeah, we're not a producer of the fuel.
I might be able to speak to that a little bit. I might be able to speak to the
Okay,
production
sure.
side of it
Okay,
a little
perfect.
bit. So obviously, I'm not a producer either, but in my research, what I found is that the startup of transitioning refineries over to produce HVO, there's that initial startup, but there's a lot of government incentivization right now. And so for the refineries themselves, they're seeing, I think, it's good for them, and the government is incentivizing also companies that are starting to use it either with passive carbon reduction, but also tax incentives there. So I think you can talk more about the cost of the actual product going to the tank, but the production, it has gone up, but they're starting to see it level off, and I think the more that it's being used, the more it's able to move, the more we're going to see a drop in price.
So right now, fuel has come down. A year ago, when fuel was really high, it was only a few dollars more a gallon, right? But I've seen the price stay pretty steady with this product. But as Cameron said, I think as it has started to, obviously, usage and demand will drive price, right? So right now, a bulk of the price is transportation because it's unable to be pushed up the pipeline. There are some companies that are looking at pushing this up. One has said maybe by the end of this year, but you have to buy bulk gallons in the millions of gallons, right? So now you've got to find someone that can buy a million gallons that have multiple customers. And that's what our hope is with companies like Compass and other larger companies, data centers, will hopefully get in on this mix and want to start using it. That will drive the usage, which will hopefully drive price down. And because as that demand and the logistics is really the issue with the fuel price now. So the demand hopefully will carve out a better logistic path of getting that fuel there versus just by rail. So.
Well, and then it ranges because it's a different price every day, but that
Right.
30% or so charge that's above a standard ULSD. What you're getting on the back end of that with the sustainability, your carbon reduction, instead of buying carbon credits, it's an actionable change that you're making with your company that's changing your carbon output from day one. So where people are spending money to buy these carbon credits because they have trees and that sort of thing, that they're getting acreage of carbon credits. Instead of spending the money on that, you're spending it on an actual product that's going into your tank. So there are multiple ways to look at it. So, yeah.
With the government's interest,
Hi.
the government's interest in sponsoring the organic diesel, the green diesel. How are they talking about the SPR at all? We're talking about a blend, right? How is this strategic petroleum reserve, even if they sold it all off? Is that kind of like a best foot forward with idea?
Yeah,
You know, when we talk about petroleum products,
right.
the government has, you want to say, I don't want to get into a political.
I was going to say, I can't really speak to the government's motives.
If you're talking about longevity and we're talking about
Yeah.
storing diesel, you have to talk about the SPR, yes? The strategic petroleum reserve, yes?
Well,
Yeah, but I think you have to, but it's also, it's not, it is a different product, right? It is, right.
So where we were on that. So you were talking about facilities managing, actually doing the ROI on. Is this what you do? You're a refiner now?
No, we are not
No.
a refiner. No, we're a last mile fuel company, so we have relationships with refineries. Yeah, yeah. Okay, fair enough. Okay, understand your question now. Absolutely. Okay.
so that,
No, that's fine.
you're good. Okay.
I don't know.
I think we got another one over here.
As your emissions permit, amending it,
Yep.
how many customers are able to do peak shaving demand response because of lower emission or cleaner emissions? They're able to operate that for economic purposes during the sun season?
It's not a decrease enough in the emissions to realize any of that. I mean, it's really similar to diesel, just a little less. I mean, I guess on a grand scale, you could probably add a couple more engines, but you talk about some of the restrictive counties, they're not going to want you to run during the day anyway, no matter if you're burning diesel or, rose oil. It doesn't matter.
Now, I have seen discussion, and I noticed your shirt, not to call you out on the Stafford, Virginia shirt, and so I don't know what your involvement is, but I have seen discussion in the data center alley where they're talking about there's not enough electrical power for the grid with all of these data centers coming online, and discussion about possibly increasing run times. And so I'm not saying that HVO is going to be the answer to that, but it may be an option that might allow for longer burn times when necessary that's going to have a less offensive impact on the environment there. Yeah, I think from a sustainability perspective, it's something that we're all learning right now as corporate citizens to be. We're learning about carbon more than I think we ever have. The scientists have known about it, but now it's something that's being brought into the business vernacular. So we've provided these charts here to show that there is a bit of a difference. It's not a monumental difference, but the actual net carbon is. Different localities, I think, are putting more emphasis on it than others. If you're in California, the emission standards are so dramatically different than what you're going to find in Northern Virginia right now or in Boston area. So it really is something that it's evolving, and it's evolving rapidly. But I think it's a little early to say for sure what kind of how standards might change when we switch from the ULSD over to HVO, if people are doing that at the rate that Europe has over the past 5 years.
I think it's important to talk about net zero as well, because nobody's going to sit up here and say burning HVO doesn't add carbon into the atmosphere, because it does. The point here being net zero is that we're adding only the amount of carbon into the atmosphere to achieve net zero, where that carbon is removed by the atmosphere and healthy ocean photosynthesis and trees. So being where we are trying to meet the Paris Treaty by 2030, net zero is what we're trying to achieve, because it's the old bathtub analogy, where we're adding carbon into carbon, which is the water into the bathtub, and the atmospheres and healthy oceans are taking it out via the drain. So we already have a level of water in the bathtub. What we're trying to do is to stop adding more than we can take away. So if we can achieve net zero, we're still left with a bathtub half full of water, but it's not overflowing and leading to that negative aspects of the increased carbon in the atmosphere.
I like the analogy. Thanks, Wayne. Do we have any other questions? We want to open it up, yeah.
So we have to filter our diesel every year.
Mm-hmm.
Do you absolutely do that with the HVO?
Yeah, so you guys polish your fuel every year? Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so we don't, not every year, so we're looking at that. So as a whole for diesel period, we recommend as a company, we recommend polishing it every 3 years or as needed but we found that if it's a healthy diesel, it's shelf stable, once every 3 years really kind of has done the trick for the most part. So the same thing we're recommending there. That's one reason we are testing it quarterly to make sure that there is, and if there is any issues, then we will go ahead and we'll go in there and take some action upon that. But as a whole, we're recommending once every 3 years on that.
Yeah, as the end user, we're sampling quarterly, so if we don't find any water intrusion or condensation over the required the allowed limit, we're not going to polish before 3 years.
To mitigate that, you could just pretty much stockpile.
Yes.
And that's pretty much what we're doing, yeah. A full tank doesn't condense. That's a very good point.
And that's a recommendation. That was going to be actually my next question. Is your tank full? Because right.
I'm just starting to get into it.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Well, and can you talk a little bit about the oxygen in HVO? With the way it's produced, there's less oxygen in the water, so there's less opportunity for the bad stuff to build up in there. And so, at least with what I've seen in the research that I've done in Europe, they're finding that it is more stable. I think Foster's taking a very considerate approach about it because they're one of the first to do it here in the U.S. and Compass obviously wants to have the integrity of their fuel. But the data that we're seeing, and if you go online and start researching, you're going to see almost everything is coming from Europe right now, data-wise. That it is actually considered to be more stable than standard, a ULSD.
And that's another reason we've recommended and working with Compass on doing the quarterly testing right now is it builds a group of data to be able to provide here in the States versus having to reach out to Europe. I mean, obviously, fuel is fuel, right? But standards are different in other places, so we'd like to have that data ourselves here that we can look at here, and that's kind of what we're really trying to work with these guys and doing is trying to be able to gather a group of data to be able to provide for others, and in hopes that, because I think now people are kind of scared of it, right? They don't know it's new. So people are like a little leery. But I think if we can gather that data and show that, listen, over the last year or two, this fuel has truly performed just as well, if not better than diesel has, then others will look at using it. Wayne talked earlier about this. They ran for 2 days in Dallas on that stuff. So I mean, it's with no issues, and we've seen that in other places. The commissioning data is the same as diesel. So.
And so there's HVO 100, so it's 100%, and then you're using is it an 80-20 blend? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so can you talk a little bit, because I know there's a stigma with biofuels.
Right.
So can you talk about that a little bit?
So there's an RD99, and then what we're using is an 80-20. It's 80% HVO, 20% biodiesel. And there is a stigma on biodiesel. Everybody's like, oh God, it's bio, it's horrible. But when bio first was produced, there was no standard on it. So a couple of buddies got together and were like, hey, let's make some good biodiesel, make a little money. They were making it, there was no standard, they were just selling it. So you didn't know what you were getting from one to the next. Whereas now there is a standard for biodiesel that has to be across the board. The other problem with biodiesel is just the honest chemical makeup of it. It's got esters and methyl esters, and as a byproduct of that, a
lot of bio manufacturers will actually sell that methyl ester or the esters off to clean as a cleaning product. They use it for grill cleaners and degreasers and things. So what happens a lot of times with bio in a tank, especially if it's an older tank, is it truly cleans that tank. And so as it's in that tank, it's pulling stuff off the sidewalls of that tank, generators run, filters clog up, people think, oh, I got bad biodiesel, when in fact, a lot of times it's not bad biodiesel. It just was, you had things in your tank and it cleans what it does and it cleans that, it was cleaning that tank.
Yeah, so I mean, it's important, I touched on again that with this 80-20 blend, we're not sitting up here telling you it's perfect. The biodiesel is a lot better. You know, we do have to add 10% diesel in it during the winter to raise that point. What do you call it?
Cold filter plug-in.
Cold filter plug-in. Thanks. That memory at some point. But yeah, I don't think we touched on it well enough. We are using it for commissioning, but I want to stress that we're doing the same block loads and step loads that you would do normally with your generator testing, 8-hour burn-ins and all that. And we're seeing no degradation of performance, still pulling down the PQM data off the foot PQM you hook up to look at the sine waves and the waveforms and the voltage and frequency drops when you hit it with 100% load. And the generators have all passed. There's not been an issue in having to go back. So, I mean, the performance is there, and that's really kind of what I want to stress is that the generators themselves don't know any different, but the tanks may. So, when you go to use this, I mean, it is an immediate impact to the environment because it's made a lot cleaner, a lot less carbon footprint when it's manufactured. But when you go to put it in tanks, like Brian said, the newer tanks are easier because they don't have a lot inside of them as far as growth or crud is concerned on the inside of the tanks. But if you go to put it in an older tank, I would suggest talking to your delivery or manufacturer, or reach out to a consultant or even Foster to help understand what you may need to do, putting that diesel in and then polishing it a week later, just because you want to get all that crud out and it's removed from the tank. So I think it's important to put the real spin on that. It is a great product. It does do a lot for sustainability, but there are some things to look out for.
So we've already had some really great questions, but we'd like to open up for the last few minutes if anybody has any other questions. Yeah.
Consumption rate of burn higher than standard diesel or same? No difference in usage of gallon. And you said it's about 2 to 3 hours more gallons, what you're saying?
Yeah, I have to see what diesel is today, but yes, it's somewhere between $2 and $4 or more gallon, depending on where you're at. When we first started using it, when the diesel was a lot higher, but the swing on the HVO has not swung like diesel has. It's stayed kind of solid across the board. And again, a lot of that comes from the transportation of that.
Yeah, it's more expensive. Seriously, like from an end user perspective, it's 2.5x of where diesel is right now.
If it was cheaper, nobody would be buying diesel.
Right. But again, if we can get other companies on board, reach out to the facility operators here and start getting the interest up, start buying more, and realize that economy of scale. When everyone's buying it, we can start being shipped through pipelines, and it's dedicated facilities to manufacturing HVO all the time, so they don't have to switch over. I mean, I can see it, easily dropping to where it becomes a viable option as a price point for diesel.
Yes.
What do you consider old as for the tank wise? Less than 10 years, maybe more than 10 years? Or?
Yeah, I would, that's a loaded question. Yeah, so it depends, right? The condition of that tank, condition of the fuel before it went in that tank, outside influences on that tank. It would just, that's honestly, you could say a tank was old after 3 years, and then, or you might have a tank that's 10 years old and it's really clean. We've seen them, I've seen tanks in certain, depends on the area too. An area that's really humid. I've seen tanks in Miami that are not very old that look like they're 20 years old inside, and then I've seen tanks up north and that, you know, that do not look like that. They're older tanks, but they're really clean tanks. They've been there for, you know, 8, 10, 12 years. You know, that's really, it's hard to answer what an old tank looks like. I don't know if old tank would be the right word. Maybe it would be a clean tank inside, or, you know, a tank that has had some contamination in it, so. Yeah.
So you guys ship everything by rail. Does it stay on, like, in the rail yard until it's ready to be delivered? You have a storage facility?
Yeah, so we do ship it by rail. Normally, we will pick that fuel up, deliver it straight off the rail car. What is left, we have been storing in the 3 markets that we're working with these guys in. So we have some storage that we have procured for these guys in those three markets. I'm sorry. Of the 3 markets, Dallas, Phoenix, and then Northern Virginia. Yeah. Well, it's not Northern Virginia. We're located in Virginia, in Central Virginia, and that we're storing. And for Northern Virginia, we're actually storing that at our facility there. We have storage at our facility. We're storing it. So, yeah. Brian, yes, sir. No, that's a great question. So HVO as a whole, as it is renewable fuel, is less. There's not a lot of lubricity in that fuel. So that is where the biofuel and that 80/20 really comes into play. The biofuel adds lubricity back to that fuel. So it does have the same lubricity effect as petroleum diesel does as well. Yes, so we use ASTM D975, which is the ASTM standard for petroleum diesel. It is tested it is tested by that same standard. D975, no sir, That is the petroleum diesel standard. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Since been.
Yeah. What, that fuel there?
The HVO?
HVO, yes. Yeah, so you can, correct. And that is what we say. So that has kind of been the goal, is to have that bulk storage there for the customer to be able to use in an emergency. But if it's a long lasting emergency and and they need to switch over to diesel, that is the beauty of this fuel. It's a 1-for-1 swap. If you get to a point that, hey, I've depleted what I have in storage, then you can swap that over and use diesel back in there as well. Yes, sir.
Thanks for taking my question. I thought I was late.
Nope, you're good.
But when you talk about blue diesels now,
Do you want to?
I got this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when
Wayne's got this.
we did the addendum to the permit, our air quality consultant redid all the calculations for the specific generators we were using to find that it was similar. It was a little less, but it was similar. But not all local jurisdictions require it, but in particular, Northern Virginia requires stack testing for 10% sample of whatever generators were just permitted. So having to do that anyway, whether it had been diesel or HVO or a mix, we're doing that. It was done, I think it was done last month, and we're still waiting the results of the stack testing. But we have to do it with HVO just like any of the other diesels, yeah.
And if you want to follow up with Wayne, we can give you his email address when that's available.
Yeah,
So-
hit me up on LinkedIn, anybody.
Well, yeah, Compass is the data center that's using the fuel. And then Foster is supplying the fuel to Compass. Yeah.
And that's the net zero, where the kind of the net zero comes into play there, right? Yeah.
So Foster,
We're a
You
last
wanna-
mile fuel company,
Yeah.
so yeah, we are not refining the fuel. ourselves. We are not a refiner. So, yes, that's right. So we're a last mile fuel company. We buy and sell fuel, and we deliver. We're delivering this fuel into diesel and gas and propane and all. So we're a last mile fuel company is what we are. So but the feedstock for this is mainly rapeseed, which is canola crush, canola and other. There are some animal fats, but it is mainly a vegetable based product.
And if anybody's interested in the feedstocks, the companies here in the United States that are refining it, over in Europe as well, I would recommend looking at the Diamond Green, the Nestle, and the REG websites. They're the three primary refineries that are, I believe, manufacturing for here in the U.S. So, if you look at them, they'll be able to give you reports as to what their feedstock sourcing is. And then if you deep dive, which I love to do, you can go in and actually really see the reporting on the sustainability and the even the human impact of it. So, yeah. You want to?
We have a white paper that was produced, and it's on our website, is it not?
Yeah, there's a white paper that was done early last year that's on the Foster Mission Critical website. And then I've come across two others if you go and you Google it, you will find lots of information. There's also supplier websites. Foster here in the U.S. really, I think, probably has more going on their website data-wise, but if you go and search some of the European sites, they have a wealth of knowledge on there as well.
Got one in the back.
Yeah.
I apologize for being late.
And worse.
So for the required annual fuel testing, I would imagine the lab testing and the results are going to be different than what we do with typical fuels. So we're required to test our fuel annually.
Yeah, so we're doing quarterly testing just because it's HVO and it's new and we want to make sure we're covering our bases. But every test we've gotten back so far is within the recommended standards for diesel.
Okay, so DOE is that.
You would know those better than I.
Say that one more time.
The DOE subset. DOE subset standards.
Yes, same. It's the same substandards. It's tested by the same ASTM D975 standard that diesel is tested by. It's a fifth. And listen, and there's 1,000 tests in the D975. But so what we do a 15-panel test, and so there are some other tests that people require. That this cold filter plugging point is not a required test, but that is still in the D975. So, but the standard that it is tested by is the same standard as petroleum-based diesel. Yes. And like I said, we mentioned the quarterly testing. That is not a requirement of this fuel. It is just something that
You have a unique partnership.
right that we have come together and worked to come up with to make sure they feel good about the fuel in the tank. It is a new fuel.
Yep.
It is a mission critical environment. They have a zero downtime atmosphere there. So we want to make sure that we're able to support that. Plus, it gives us a group of data that we can start looking at and being able to provide more to a group like this. So
So if I understand, you're testing it quarterly?
no, we do not. We draw the samples for these guys. So we also, on top of this, we have a fuel quality division. We do testing, polishing, additives, and all of that also. But we actually use a third-party lab. We do not do the testing ourselves.
The fox is not watching the hen house.
Right.
I know where you're getting at. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, we do not. Right. We do not draw it ourselves. We use a third-party lab for that. Yes.
Any other questions? I know we're up against the 9 o'clock hour. The hour went by really quickly. Yes?
So there will be no impact on the warranty of the generator?
You have to check with your specific manufacturer, but for the most part, they are warrantying them. Scania, Caterpillar, you name it, Kohler, they're all on board with it. You can get an easy answer on their website or with a quick phone call, but the adoption for HVO over the past, I'd say 6 to 9 months, almost all of them have added it to their websites. So and then Toyota trucks as of September, Ford It's
Mercedes.
yeah, Mercedes. So it's becoming, if you've got a car in California, you can put it in your diesel car in California at the pump. So it's becoming much more mainstream, but I'd say that, yeah, Compass and Foster, East Coast and moving towards the central part of the U.S. are on the cutting edge, and really appreciate all of the information that you shared with us this morning. And I'm excited to see where this goes, because I'm excited about the product. I think it's actually the real deal. So it's encouraging. If anybody wants to come up and see them afterwards, ask questions, that's great. Thank you all very much for your time this morning. Have a good day.